My name is Kelly Anoe, and I work for a nonprofit organization. What was that? You want to know if working for a nonprofit is a real job? Yes, working for a nonprofit is a real job, and I'm here to tell you that we need to rethink the way we think about nonprofits. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, how I got here, and my experience with nonprofit organizations. So I've always known that I've wanted to work in nonprofits, even though I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So after high school, I went to college and was planning to major in social work, but I got pregnant at 19 and had a baby, and so plans changed. All of a sudden, I had to start thinking about how am I going to pay my bills, buy diapers, pay for childcare and house and food. And so I got a job processing timesheets for a Fortune 500 technology company. Real exciting. So it was during that time that I realized that I really hated that job. And it was also at the height of the Y2K era. So for those of you who are young in the audience, you may not remember Y2K, but it's when everybody thought that as soon as the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 2000, that our systems were all going to shut down. All of our computer systems, the grids, our software, banking would all come crashing down, and everything would stop. So fortunately, that didn't happen. The world didn't end. But what I did see when the dot-com bubble burst was I saw firsthand, I had a front row seat to how employees were collateral damage and all of that. And I realized more than ever that I wanted to pursue my passion. So I survived Y2K. So I was able to take advantage of the tuition reimbursement that was offered by that Fortune 500 company to finish my bachelor's degree in social work and get a job at a hospital in Chicago Heights. And so I was working as a social worker in an ER diversion program where I was working with patients who were repeatedly using the ER to try to get them set up with the wraparound services that they needed. What I found out really quickly was that that program was part of a broken system that was designed to fail. So I was working with the patients, and upon discharge, if they were homeless, my goal was to set them up with housing services, or if they had substance abuse addictions, to try and get them in rehab facilities. If they had 5 prescriptions upon discharge, let's get those prescriptions filled. Problem was those services weren't available. There were no beds at the shelter. No rehab facility would take them if they were uninsured. No pharmacy would fill the prescriptions without insurance and without money. And so I wanted to figure out a way that we could work within that system to improve the services that were being provided. So I went to get my MBA and work in nonprofit administration to really focus on program design, development, outcomes, and started working as an executive director at a small community-based organization in Calumet City before coming to Legacy Foundation. So 10 years ago, I started at Legacy Foundation, which is the community foundation for Lake County. And so now it's given me a new perspective as a funder. So my experience in direct service, program development and design, operations, management, and as a funder have all taught me that we need to rethink the way we think about nonprofits. And so I'm going to start by talking about the community. And when I say community, I mean all of us. I mean you, me, we, all of us. We need to rethink the way we think about nonprofits. So honestly, I really don't like the term nonprofits. I think that there's a movement out there, a very small movement, but there's a movement to use the term impact organization, because that puts the cause front and center as opposed to really focusing on what the organization cannot do. Also, the term nonprofit is misleading from a financial perspective. It indicates that it's somehow unlawful for the organization to operate in the black, which is not true. Organizations can make money. They just are not allowed to pay out a profit to shareholders. So for the remainder of the evening, I'm going to try to use the term impact organization, which will actually be hard for me because I always talk about nonprofits and what they do. So, but we're going to try and bring that cause and front and center and call them impact organizations. So another way that we can rethink impact organizations is by focusing on there was a report by the Lilly Endowment. So how many of you have benefited from the services of an impact organization over the past year? So a few of you in the audience. So there was a report from the Lilly Endowment that asked respondents how many of the respondents had benefited from the services of a nonprofit, remember, impact organization, over the past year, and only 5.4% said they had. Now, that number is really low considering all the ways that these organizations benefit our lives, from arts and culture to parks and recreation, youth programs, senior services, church, music. So it shows that people really don't recognize the true value that these organizations provide to our lives or to the community. There was also a data that came out from the nonprofit survey that showed, the Indiana Nonprofit Project, that showed that nonprofit organizations have a huge economic impact on the community. In Northwest Indiana alone, 11% of jobs are people who work in impact organizations. That's 33,000 jobs that are people working in that industry. That has a direct impact on our local economy through goods and services that are purchased and taxes that are paid. And so it's a huge economic driver and provides a big value. One other way we can think about impact organizations is when we think about overhead. So there have been some studies and a few organizations out there that, rightfully so, were called out for how they were spending their funds. And so, because it led to this overhead becoming a bad word in the impact organization industry among nonprofits, right? Funders didn't want to fund overhead. There were reports showing what percentage overhead each organization had. But when we think about overhead, we think about really what's needed to keep an organization running, right? To pay rent, to pay the utilities, to pay for the staff that provide those vital services. When a trucking industry comes into town using tax incentive dollars, they're applauded. They get a press release and a ribbon cutting because they're there creating jobs for the economy. But an impact organization comes into town, creates the same number of jobs, and they are questioned about, how much of that is overhead? How are you using those dollars? So we need to really look at where are we prioritizing the impact that we're having in our community. Another way that we can rethink about impact organization is, so I'm also looking at as a funder, right? Funders need to rethink the way that we think about impact organizations. A lot of people think about funders and they think it's all about handing out the checks, right? You get a grant, you get a grant, you get a grant. That's my best Oprah impression. But really, it's a lot more complex than that. Funders have people that we are accountable to. We have to be accountable to donors and stakeholders. But there's things we can do to really rethink the way that we are leading our funding and our funding opportunities. So one thing that we can do is encourage organizations to take risks. When you prohibit risks, you kill innovation. If an entrepreneur takes risks, they're applauded. If an impact organization takes risks, they're questioned about how they're using the funds and if that's a good use of their funding. Even if that risk is to try and find an innovative solution to end homelessness. Another way that impact organizations can be helped by funders is by having those funders allow more unrestricted expenses to support the overhead that's so critical in the services that they provide. So if some of those dollars can be used for fundraising, and which is kind of a building block to then management and operations expenses, which leads to higher quality of services and direct program expenses provided. So funders who offer operating support are rare, right? And so that's one area that I know organizations are always looking for, is trying to find that opportunity to look for funders who can provide more of that critical operating support, allowing them to be able to provide those essential services. And funders can also help nonprofit organizations, impact organizations, by allowing them more flexibility in the funding applications. Oftentimes, funding applications are cumbersome, take a lot of work, and those organizations are busy providing the services. They don't have the staff to be able to dedicate to the searching for funding, applying for funding. And then you start with all the reporting and deliverables and all of that. They don't have time for that. So funders can be more flexible in allowing the organizations to, with flexibility when it comes to the application process and simplifying that process. But what matters the most is how the impact organizations see themselves. Now, a lot of people start a 501c3. They get there because they're passionate about a particular cause. They want to do something for the youth in their community. They want to do something about the environmental issues that they see. But they don't realize how much goes into running an impact organization. They don't realize that it needs to truly be run like a business. And so really looking at how they see themselves and treating it like a business, developing a strategic plan, developing a budget, having clear goals, objectives, outcomes, what deliverables, right? What is your good? What is your service that you're providing? And making sure that that is very clear when you can make the case to funders. And impact organizations can then invest in themselves. And that's, of course, given that the funders and the community also allow them to invest in themselves and to invest in their growth. But a lot of people who are running the organizations, they're so charitable by nature that they're not even taking that money to be able to turn around and invest it back into themselves. And therefore, they're not even seeing that the marketing dollars that could be going to work promoting the services and what they're doing, which could in turn bring in additional funding. So, have to have the budget, right? Need to make a budget so that you can show where you're at, where your expenses are. So, in conclusion, impact organizations are a vital contributor to our local economy. They show perseverance through what they do, how they respond to the community needs. I saw during the COVID pandemic that, the essential responders were out there working, and frontline workers, our grocery store workers and restaurant employees and healthcare employees were all being hailed as heroes. And I think some of the unsung heroes during the COVID pandemic were our impacted organization employees, who, we had Meals on Wheels staff and volunteers who were still delivering meals every day. We had homeless shelter and domestic violence shelter staff who were there 24/7, and they were some of the unsung heroes during that COVID pandemic. So if we were all to come together and rethink the way we think about impact organizations, we could help them provide even stronger services in our communities. Thank you very much.